to take you through the funding flows of how the impact bond model works. First, just to kind of explain a principle. Basically what an impact bond does is it pays for an outcomes-based contract. An outcomes-based contract is a contract that's set up between your funder, which in this case, say Funza Lushaka, and your service provider, in which case, say, any one of your programs that you've been talking about. The difference between an outcomes-based contract and a traditional contract is that an outcomes-based contract pays when outcomes are achieved and verified. So your funder, Funza Lushaka, would pay you in arrears. They'd only pay you once you've achieved a certain outcome that they've stipulated. Your traditional contracts, obviously, are generally paid against inputs and activities. In other words, if you have this many children going through your program, we will pay you this amount, regardless of whether they actually pass at the end of the program or not. So that's the principle of an outcomes-based contract. Obviously, many organizations cannot take the risk that they're not going to achieve outcomes, especially non-profit organizations. So those organizations, if they want to enter into a contract with the funder, need to raise some sort of finance up front to be able to run the program until the end of the program, when they can demonstrate their success and get some money back from the funder. So an impact bond is a way of pre-financing the services that you're providing. Okay, so let me explain it in real terms, looking at this diagram. So you've got your outcomes funder on the right, just say that's Funza Lushaka. Say for argument's sake, they are going to pay if students under your care pass a bachelor's degree or a PGC at the end of 3, 4, or 1 year, whatever the case may be. They will pay you tuition fees, for example. You set up a contract to state as such. Then what happens is that you need to go and raise investment or finance in order to provide this service. So you go to an investor. Generally, with impact bonds in existence at the moment, those investors have been socially minded investors. So they're not just looking for a financial return, they're looking to achieve social impact with the money that they're spending. Because frankly, you're not going to make them a massive return, but you are going to make a huge impact in putting qualified teachers into the marketplace that love teaching and love children. Those socially minded investors in the existing bonds that are in operation at the moment have tended to be foundational investors, so Alma, for instance, or DG Murray Trust. None of these exist in South Africa, so overseas you'd be looking at the big foundations in the US and the UK. That money could also be coming from high net worth individuals, and frankly it could also be coming from institutions. So there are banks that have been involved in financing these kind of services. Then you as the service provider, use your model, whatever model that is. John loves his model, and Peter loves his model, and et cetera, et cetera. It's model agnostic. I'm not saying that that's the most efficient way to do it, but it's model agnostic. Everyone wants to get to the same end point. You work with children, with students, and once you've verified that they've passed those courses and they've achieved whatever academic attainment or whatever outcomes you stipulate, then the Funza Lushaka will pay out that socially minded investor. They will pay them out their capital that they put in, and they will also pay them a rate of return that is pre-negotiated. But the higher the impact, in other words, the better the results you achieve, the more return they are likely to achieve. If you don't achieve the outcomes, then they don't get paid. You don't take the financial risk, but you don't get paid. They've done the diligence on your organization. They should understand whether you're going to achieve it or not. They are taking the risk, and they get paid in arrears. You as an organization get the money up front from them to be able to deliver that program. That slide I showed you was a single transaction model. This is a fund. This is a fund model. So your outcomes fund is going to be the same. Say it's Funza Lushaka, the outcomes are going to be the same. But instead of Funza Lushaka paying a single organization on the basis that I described, they can fund multiple service providers on that same basis. Those multiple service providers can either be funded, can be financed by the same investors, or they can be each financed by separate investors. You can structure them in numerous ways. And then the impact bond nomenclature in that case, and that's a diagrammatic way of saying that actually 3 impact bonds are formed from that single fund. So that's just getting you sort of familiar with how the terms work. If I was to give you an actual example, let's ignore the black outline boxes for now. So we look at your outcomes fund, Funza Lushaka, with hopefully some private donor CSI money. They will pay on the basis of a bachelor degree or a PGCE. You will then have your service providers, LEAP, SASA, Pioneer, raising funding from those particular investors. You see Old Mutual there with their Education Development Fund, DG Murray Trust, Kapiso Capital. They will work with students. Once they've achieved those outcomes, then Funza Lushaka will pay out those investors with a return on their investment. How this community of practice works. Obviously, as John said, you could just be a shared platform of learning, and with each one wedded to their own particular model, which is extremely valuable. Some of you might be wanting to franchise your model and be doing it in your own particular areas through other organizations that you have relationships with, etc. But there's an opportunity to franchise a model. There's obviously an opportunity to unite and to share your learning into a franchise model that you can share with other extraordinary schools or other private schools, or frankly, you can share with other government schools. So if we're thinking about scale, then I think, I don't know if this has come up in conversation, I think that there's a conversation to be had around how can we start integrating this into high-functioning government schools. And yeah.
Could I suggest that in your advocacy, in our advocacy, if we were able to do that to Funza Lushaka or to UNISA, but particularly in this case to Funza Lushaka, if you were able to say that 20% of the teachers produced could be employed in the low fee paying school sector without a repayment, for example, that part of your push and pull of the exchange is that not all the teachers you're producing are going to go into the public school sector, that a proportion is because you're getting a better return, that they would allow for a portion to go into the low fee paying school sector. That would be another reason to leverage together.
Yeah. Is
that you could then use state money to cross fund to Peter's problem. And Peter's saying in the low, where you've got low fees, you just can't raise that kind of money. And you're going to lose those teachers because they're going to have to leave your independent school. Whereas if we could make a precondition, part of the impact on outcome is a maximum of 20% would stay in a particular sector.
Yeah.
Is that, would that be overcomplicated?
I mean, I sort of assumed that would have to be a negotiating point.
Okay.
Because you're not going to enter into this agreement if none of your teachers that you're producing can go into your own schools.
No, if you have to buy them out in order to keep them in your own school, you know, that's a huge cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I just ask, but there's a lot of design that goes into it up front before there's anything that takes place. But one of the questions that I actually wanted to ask just later on is, who are the stakeholders that need to be included in this conversation? So if we just look, the main challenge I think around accessing is that recipients are required to work in a public school. It's not a bad thing, but from what I've heard, it can be quite demoralizing for them, and many of them leave the profession as a result. So I think what we're talking about is that some can remain in functional schools, and actually there can be perhaps some input into public schools that would be able to absorb them. And then the opportunities, look, we want to unlock public funding for these higher quality programs. We want to be able to leverage that funding to unlock more private funding in the space. We basically want to scale. I mean, this model is to help us, hopefully help us all to scale, so we're more than the sum of the parts. And everyone's real goal is to improve the quality of teachers. And not only that, but there are a lot of other components of your program where you empowering these kids to think about going further in their careers and hopefully contributing to the sector as a whole.